Ladies and gentlemen, kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson! You say you want some revelation, well, here you go. It's gonna blow your freaking mind.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the weekly Mormon News Roundup, where D-Bays and crew will ruminate on the great and spacious beehive. Today is September 24th, 2024. This is episode 78. We have Peter Bleakley from the Mormon Civil War, who's going to be co-hosting. We're celebrating Moroni Day this week, and we're going to tell you all about that. The Tim Ballard craziness is continuing. You're not going to want to miss our coverage of this. And the LDS Church has appealed James Huntsman's tithing lawsuit. We're going to give you temple updates. We've got a big episode. You're not going to want to miss a minute of this. Now, if you want to get in touch with me, I'm at www.mormonnewsroundup.org, or you can send me an email to collab@mormonnewsroundup.org. I'd like to welcome onto the program Peter Bleakley from the Mormon Civil War. Peter, how you doing?
I'm really well, thank you. It's a great privilege to be here, D-Best. I'm a huge fan of the show. So this is a dream come true. I'm excited. And what a week.
Yeah, what a week. This is going to be fantastic. Now, what is your 45-second Mormon story?
So I'm a BYU baby. I was born at BYU to British parents who were students there, and we came back to Britain when I was a toddler. So I've grown up here in the southeast of England, been a faithful member all my life. And then after the shenanigans going on with the November policy and the gospel topics essays and everything, I've kind of had a classic faith and trust crisis, as it were. And my approach is to try and be solution oriented. I think there's a lot in the religion that could still make Mormonism a great world religion, but I feel it's self-sabotaging by doing too many of the sort of pharisaical things that Jesus condemns. So I started posting in Facebook kind of big, long essays, trying to analyze what's going on. Why are we failing? Why are our members leaving the church? Why are so many of my family and friends going? And that evolved into a podcast called Mormon Civil War, which started in 2021. And around that time, I was excommunicated for it. My state president felt that my criticisms of church leaders were too much, and I therefore met the definition of apostasy, which is super tight now. You're not even allowed to criticize church policies, never mind doctrines, without it automatically incurring church discipline. But I still attend. I go as often as I can on a Sunday. I'm continuing the podcast and trying to be a voice for what the church could do to reform, to be more healthy, and if it wants to actually save itself, rather than just disappearing in the next 10 years. So that's kind of where I'm at in the space that I'm occupying.
Now, there's tons of Latter-day Saint podcasts out there, Peter. What makes Mormon Civil War special and worth listening to?
They're all great, aren't they? I think for me, I'm offering long-form analysis. And while I'll dip into church history and relevant things there, mostly what I'm concentrating on is what are the leaders of the church doing now? What are they saying in General Conference? What are they saying to the young people in their global broadcasts? What is the church education system curriculum actually teaching the teenagers and young adults about how they should be Mormons? What's going on with society at large, and what the doctrines and history are? And it's in that forum that if reform is going to happen, we need a clear understanding of what they're saying, what the problems with it are, and what the alternative could be. So it's a real mixture of very strong critical analysis with lots of current evidence. Here's what they're saying here. Here's what they said there. But also running through it all. How could we do it better? I don't believe in criticizing anything without offering a better alternative. So I'm kind of trying to present a hive mind conglomeration of all the ideas that are discussed in the many nuanced and post-Mormon forums, and kind of bring it all together into a simpler possible solution package in what can feel very confusing, sort of all these different crises going on left, right and center. So I'm trying to have a joined up overview, and my listeners really appreciate that. They feel that I've kind of made sense of what they know is happening, but can't quite always put together in their heads or don't have time to. And so really, lovely feedback from people saying you've really validated where I'm at. You're making sense. Mostly they're like, this church isn't going to change, but they appreciate that I'm holding out a hope for what that could look like if it was going to happen.
Yeah, I watched several episodes of the Mormon Civil War in preparation for this week, because I'd always been wanting to watch your channel. And that's one reason I wanted to invite you on. I was like, I've seen you from the Brit Avengers, and I wanted to see what your channel was all about. And your videos are quite long. Some of them are 6 hours long. And I was like, okay, let's do this. I
It's a
started
big commitment.
yeah, I was like, okay, fine. I'm having him on. I got to know what he's all about. And I was like, a 6 hour video. Holy
Yeah.
cow. I was like, okay, let's watch a little bit of this.
Yeah.
I watched the entire thing through all the way through. And I was like, okay,
Mhm.
I'm going to start another one. I watched so many of your videos and they are long, but they are tremendously good. If you can just, when you click on a video, you think 6 hours, am I going to be able to do this? And they fly by. So it's really, really great. I'm really glad to have you on the program. That does take us to our Mormon News
Thank
Roundup
you.
joke of the week. And you got our joke of the week here. And I also have one. Go ahead, Peter.
Okay, I'm rubbish at jokes. I've only got one. It's quite a good one. So, what was the fruit that Adam and Eve ate in the Garden of Eden, Divas?
That's a very important question. I don't know the answer to it, though.
It must have been a banana because they slipped and fell. Badung.
Okay, that's very good. Now that also, I will give you my joke of the week here as well. Here, my joke of the week comes in a visual form here, and it was dropped by Pat Bagley, who does a lot of funny takes here over at the Deseret News. And it shows a sidekick who says, "I didn't see that coming," and the LDS Church drops an anvil right on Tim Ballard and his political ambitions. Yeah. He got absolutely slammed, and we're going to get into that. We're going to save that for. We got a couple of news articles that we need to cover before that time frame, and we're just going to get into that. But Tim Ballard is going to be our featured article of the week. So our first article that we came across here, Peter, is Ryan Burge. He looked at the sexual orientation of 18 to 25-year-old college students in particular, and this data was from thefire.org. 85% of Muslims are straight, 84% of Protestants are straight, 83% of Catholics are straight, and the biggest shock to him is that Latter-day Saints, only 78% said that they're straight. That really surprised me that 22% of Latter-day Saint college students are identifying as LGBTQ. What do you think here, Peter?
I'm kind of not surprised. I think there's always lots of debates about what percentage of the human population actually are LGBTQ, and lots of numbers get bandied around, 15%, 10%. I think always it's difficult to know because there's so much pressure not to reveal that about yourself. So I think it's very difficult to get accurate data, and it's highly likely that any numbers are always underselling the percentages. I can certainly speak from my own experience. I have a list which I call Gays of Our Lives, which is the 20 or so LGBTQ Latter-day Saints in my family who I served with in missions, who I was ward mission leader of when they were serving as missionaries, members of bishoprics, people I've grown up with, and from youth. And every single one of them now has had to leave activity in the church because it just was not a safe place for them. And often it's taken a whole family with them as they've processed that conflict. So I'm not at all surprised. I think the percentage of impact on the church of its hostility to LGBTQ people is so huge, that even if it's not that much of a percentage of people who actually are LGBTQ, it impacts so many larger extended families and forces them to confront some really difficult issues. It's definitely been one of the major drivers for the exodus of active members, and that's literally what's happened in my family and in the wards and stakes that I'm a part of. So I'm really pleased to have this data. Data is empowering. Obviously you have to kind of fact check it and check its sample sizes and all the rest, but it forces an issue to come to the forefront. There's a great survey going around at the moment in a lot of spaces trying to gather more data about why people are leaving. And when those results are published, it's going to be really epic. So I'm quite excited about how hard data and analysis is forcing the church to face up to some of its demons in ways that so far they've tried to ignore. And so I love it. I love to hear about this research. I think it empowers us to have the conversation. So I'm not at all surprised.
Yeah,
And
if
I
you
think
think
it's become actually easier in Mormon circles to talk about LGBTQ issues. If you're a sort of a progressive Mormon, you could say you're really keen for the church to move on this and be more feminist and stop being homophobic and transphobic. But and because a lot of people are talking about it, including the general authorities trying to hold this line, we it's a hot topic within our religion in ways that it isn't so much anymore in quite a lot of other Christian denominations. So I think, that just the fact that there is so much talk about it is maybe empowering members to self-identify a bit more honestly in these kinds of surveys. Yeah.
Think about the population of
That's my
BYU.
thoughts.
Yeah, BYU Provo has like
Mm,
35,000 students. BYU Idaho has like 17,000. BYU
mm,
Hawaii has like 5,000. And then don't
yeah,
forget Ensign College has 5 or 10,000. And then
yeah,
BYU Pathways program has 50
yeah.
or 60,000. So we're talking about BYU
Mm,
students, church related students, maybe 125,000 of
mm,
those, plus the entire
mm,
CES system as well. But just the college students,
mm,
125,000, 22% of that, we're talking about like 40,000 people here. This isn't just
yeah,
there's one guy
yeah.
in the ward,
No.
there's one guy in the stake. This is a
Mm,
really there's
mm,
just so many people that identify as
mm,
on the LGBTQ
mm,
spectrum for as part of the community that it's going to have significant impacts for the church in the future. Any last thoughts on
mm.
this information here, Peter?
Yeah, I just think why are they going to BYU is always the question. Like, why would these kids not go somewhere safer when no one is going to bat an eyelid about their sexuality or gender identity and they can just get on with their education? Why take this risk of walking into such a lion's den of an overtly hostile institution? And I think perhaps that's just part of Mormon culture that there is strong pressure within a demographic of LDS families that you send your kids to BYU. I think there are big issues, which I've talked about in my podcast, around the huge cost of university in America, which is insane, which forces a lot of basic standard middle class families to have to choose the BYU option, especially if they've been good Mormons and had lots of children, because it's all they can afford. So there are a lot of LGBTQ kids kind of being railroaded into that, even though left to their own devices, they might try somewhere safer. And of course, there's the idea that at that age, they may be trying to fix their gayness, their transgender identity, that they think going to a church school, and their parents certainly think this, will fix them. And this is kind of their big effort to sort out their lives into something that conforms with church expectations. So I think for those reasons, you can understand why maybe a disproportionate percentage of LDS youth who are LGBTQ are going to BYU, even though it seems counterintuitive. That makes
Well,
sense to me.
of course, some people don't even realize that they identify as LGBTQ until
Mm,
they get to
mm,
college,
yeah,
until something happens later on in their
yeah,
life as well.
mm,
So, our next
mm,
article
yeah.
here is the city of Cody has issued a building permit finally for the temple there. And I want to play this clip
Oh,
for you and get your reaction here, Peter.
The threat of a federal lawsuit
mm,
has
yeah.
compelled the city of Cody to issue a building permit for a new LDS temple within city limits. Construction hasn't started yet near the high-end rural neighborhood, but members of a group called Preserve Our Cody Neighborhood say the planned 101-foot lighted temple tower will block mountain views and night skies and reduce their property values. They also claim the traffic will be too heavy for the neighborhood at the end of Skyline Drive. The group filed a lawsuit in district court recently, but the Church of Latter-day Saints filed suit in district court weeks earlier. Cody Mayor Matt Hall says the city issued the building permit because they had to.
Yeah, under threat of federal lawsuit, this finally the mayor of Cody, Mr. Hall, there he initially blocked the church's permit. We've had four different lawsuits that have been filed, and finally the church has brought this tiny western town to its knees,
Mm.
and the building permit has been issued. How do you feel about what's happened here in Cody, Wyoming, Peter?
It's horrifying because it's saying might is right. Because we have the money and the lawyers, and you little tiny American town can't fight us, we will get our way. As if that's moral, if that's become the ethics of the leadership class of the church, which is hence civil war. I don't think that represents what should be core Mormon values at all. We're meant to be on the side of the underdog. And look at that beautiful landscape. I mean, we have a lot of light pollution here in Britain. We're very highly populated, but one of the most amazing experiences I ever had with the Milky Way and the night sky was in Utah. Away from the light pollution, and I've never seen the Milky Way before. And there it was. It was astonishing, Spanish Farc. Um, and just the idea that you can, Prince Charles, when there were plans to put a really ugly modernist extension on the National Gallery in London, called it a monstrous carbuncle on the face of an old friend. And he kind of led a movement for more sensitive architecture, which is still going on today. And that's what they're doing. Look at that beautiful, pristine landscape. And do they even need a temple there? All of these communities have said, we've got places zoned for this stuff. There's somewhere we're quite happy for you to have that kind of a building. Why does the church feel it has to kind of plop its scent all over pristine landscape or rural environments? It's crazy. And this would not happen in Britain. We're extremely protective of our environment. We have very strict planning rules. But the difference in America is if you waive your religion ticket, like, oh, you're oppressing me and I've got huge amounts of money and you're not letting me worship how I want to, you can get away with almost anything. You know, I think in a way it's partly a manifestation of the problems in American culture that religions have too much power to override environmental considerations. And how on earth are they thinking the local people of this town are going to love their temple if they like the majority don't want it? Like what? There is no survival instinct left in the church. They're just someone in an office in the ivory tower in Salt Lake has a whim and wants something there, and it will happen. And the job of the minions is to get it regardless. Never to listen to the people, have sensitivity to the local situation, and that's one of the reasons people are leaving the church in droves, because they keep experiencing that an authoritarian central autocratic power just railroading everyone with the wrong ideas and expecting a happy outcome. It's madness. It's been terrible PR for the church. What were they thinking, honestly? And there's
Well,
not enough people to go to these temples anyway. I mean, it's a waste of money and time.
yeah, I mean,
That's my thoughts. I'm very
presumably,
opinionated.
yeah, yeah. Presumably, somebody prayed about this and was told that God Almighty wanted the temple here. And once God has said that He wants a temple in a location, then the people in church headquarters view it as their sacred duty to push this temple over the finish line by any legal means necessary, regardless of the bridges that are burned, regardless of the feelings that are hurt, and regardless of the community sensibilities. And this isn't the only issue. You talked about the light pollution. This came out also with the Heber Valley Temple here, Peter. This was an op-ed in the Park Record here, a giant temple in my backyard. And it talked about how the church has put in a number of temples into locations here that are kind of large cities, like Fort Worth, Texas. The church put in a 33,000 square foot temple, but there's 1 million people in Fort Worth, and Austin, Texas has 1 million people, and the temple is 30,000 square foot. Bakersfield, California has 500,000, and again, a 30,000 square foot temple. At Modesto, California, 250,000 people, 30,000 square foot temple, et cetera, et cetera. The church has put into these towns modest sized temples. Grand Rapids, Michigan, population 200,000 people, and a temple is 20,000 square feet. The difference here in between both of these last ones that we talked about is Cody, Wyoming only has 10,000 people in it. It's a very small town. And Heber Valley only has Heber City's population is 17,000 people, but the temple is going to be almost 100,000 square feet. This is where you're starting to get a real disconnect between what the population really, it's about proportionality. And both of these situations where there are very small towns but very massive structures that don't fit the community, that's where we're seeing a disconnect between the church and the community in which it is trying to proselytize and put its buildings in.
And that's absolutely what we're seeing here in Europe. You know, in his mad obsession to spam the world with temples without enough, while losing the members that he'd wants to go into them, President Nelson has thrown away the rule book. There are no longer criteria for having enough members in a region to actually support it. So it's actually really harmful. In his last tranche of European temples announced, for example, one for Oslo in Norway and in Belgium, these are tiny countries with easily commutable temples in neighboring countries, but they only have about 2,000 active members per country, falling fast. You know, in Britain, we now are down to 11% active membership, and it's pretty similar in the rest of continental Europe. So and we're getting one in Birmingham. But what that temple will do is accelerate the final stage of destruction of the church in those communities. At the moment, they are merging stakes left, right, and centre. We just lost 3 London stakes. And the message given for justifying that is the stake is taking too many people for your shrinking wards to have leadership. Therefore, we'll smush these stakes together. That way you keep more of your very few remaining active leadership class members to run the wards. But if you then plonk a temple in the middle of that, the temple is going to suck up hundreds of people, everyone, to keep it open even a couple of days a week. So those people are now not going to be providing local leadership, not ministering to the few remaining members, not supporting the dwindling missionary effort. So it's like opening a black hole in the active church membership. A temple is now a curse. It's not a gift. It doesn't bring growth. It accelerates the final death throes when you don't have the population to sustain one. I mean, I'd be amazed if the Rome temple is even open 1 day a week, and it's a huge edifice. There aren't members of the church in Italy. There's hardly anyone there. It was only ever built so to create a PR moment so that President Nelson could meet the Pope in front of some cameras. It's a white elephant. I don't know if you have that phrase there. A white elephant is what we call a big project to show off and have status, but actually is empty. It's a pointless waste of time. It's not going to be useful. So this is happening in your community. It's happening in my community. Again, no common sense. The idea that numbers is all that matters, and somehow miracles will happen without changing anything to suddenly provide lots of members to go to these temples. It's just another symptom of the whole dysfunction. Much more money than sense.
Yeah. Now
is
you
what
also
that
have
means,
you also
basically.
found the
Yeah.
Mormon joke of the week that goes along with this, Peter. And for those podcast
Yes.
listeners out there, you're gonna have to read this.
Yeah.
What's this joke that
I'll
goes along
describe
with
it.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is Grondel, who's amazing. Calvin Grondel, who died recently, a wonderful cartoonist whose cartoons featured a lot in Sunstone magazine over the years. And I recently got one of his early sort of compilations. So here we have the church architect with someone from the church office coming and talking to him. And he's saying, "We need something beautiful and inspiring, and yet reflects the taste of the American middle class." So I'm an art teacher, and there's a long tradition in the art and creative worlds of assuming that middle class people, the bourgeois, have the least taste whatsoever artistically. They're desperate to conform. They want everything to be the same, suburban mindset. They're not that exciting. They're terrified of radical innovators. And this is what happened to the Provo Temple. The Provo and Ogden temples were icons of 60s design. I know not everyone loves modernism, but I used to hate it. I think, what ugly temples, what were we thinking? But as I've got older and matured in my tastes and learnt to understand the concepts of modernism, those are masterpieces. Those were beautiful. That's my parents at BYU were among the first to go through the Provo temple to help train the workers there. But that's just being replaced by another middle class Mac temple. And they're literally doing it to the Salt Lake Temple, this pioneer Victorian era edifice, which they promised to preserve every flake of paint of. As soon as after that press conference, in which President Nelson and all the conservationists there lied their heads off, they then went, "Oh, actually, we're not doing that. We're just going to destroy all the murals. We'll gut it. We'll keep some stairwells, but literally everything else," they said, "is going." Because they don't have any culture. They don't. Their education is usually as lawyers or business managers. They don't have any. The majority of general authorities don't. They're not trained in the stuff of religion and heritage. They don't understand history. They don't understand arts. They don't understand literature. They don't get any of it. They don't value it. And I'm just horrified at the whole culture in Utah that there wasn't a mass movement to literally stand in front of bulldozers until they promised not to destroy the Sistine Chapel of Mormonism. I mean, there was enough of a movement to save Minerva Teichardt's murals in the Manti Temple, we hope. Who can trust anything the church is saying about this stuff? But they've just sat there and done nothing while the Vatican of Mormonism got destroyed. And it's going to be an empty shell with just standard temple rooms inside on the whole and things like that. What's wrong with you people? Come on, Deseret. I mean, and the church constantly sells itself as this credible, established religion with a history. The pioneers crossed the plains to build these monuments to God in a desert. That's the narrative to greet the Lord at the millennium, and they're just destroying them or whitewashing them. This is what happened in Britain when the Puritans took over. They destroyed all the art and the murals in all of our parish churches and cathedrals. There's hardly any of that left. There used to be like a frenzy of amazing heritage and medieval art and sculpture, and they just gutted them and whitewashed the walls. And this is seen as one of the greatest losses to Western civilization artistically that ever happened. But Mormons have just done that to their own stuff in the 21st century. What's wrong with you people? I'm so angry about this because that's our shared heritage. We're sold on this idea that these are precious places, that this art matters, that it's these people's testimony painted on the walls. But if President Nelson just has a whim and this mad delusion that millions of people speaking different languages need to use the Salt Lake Temple in there without, I mean, you can do multi-language things on a screen without touching the walls at all. There was no need for any of it. You could have a win-win. But these people have no imagination. They just don't get any of this. And they're in charge of a religion that they don't understand religion. They don't understand heritage, but they're in charge of it. And because they're dictators with no accountability, they get what they want. and the whole institution scurries to give it to them. It's astonishing. And that when people get back into the Salt Lake Temple, I think there's going to be a major backlash. People who knew and loved it as it was are going to be horrified. I just feel glad I got to go through it once. I really hoped I'd go back and see it again, but it's
Well,
not there anymore. It's gone.
well, Peter, you're
Yeah.
making me feel terrible that I didn't do anything to stop it, but anything that I would do would have almost no effect whatsoever. But all I can say is art is very important to me. That's why I've got the BBC set behind
Yeah.
me. So, I'm
Excellent. Yes, classy. Well done.
absolutely. Now, for our listeners out there, you can find us. You can find the Mormon News Roundup on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on anywhere where podcasts are found. Would you please let us know your thoughts on the renovation of the Salt Lake Temple, which is going to be, by the way, 4 times as large. It's going to be a 400,000 square foot monstrosity, up from the 125,000 that it is, because it's adding subterranean levels. Each of those levels, 4 levels, is going to be almost 100,000 square foot apiece. It is going to be an incredible. It's going to be an incredible building. What are your thoughts on it? Leave us a note in the comment section. We'd be very grateful for that. Now, before we get into Tim Ballard, we just got a couple last notes to get through here, and this is very important here, Peter. The LDS Church has appealed the James Huntsman tithing lawsuit, because the church has said in their 24-page brief that the James Huntsman's lawsuit poses a profound threat to religious liberty. The Utah-based faith again has asked the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals to quash the fraud lawsuit. Now, of course, James Huntsman filed a lawsuit, said he wanted his tithing back from when he was paying tithing. The district court threw it out, and James Huntsman appealed it to the Ninth Circuit Court, which sent it back down to the district court. But before it sent it back down to the district court, the church has the ability to file an appeal and tell the circuit court to take one more look at it, either with the full panel of the 9 judges or again with the 3 panel judges, which sent it back down to the district court. This is the most important thing about this lawsuit, is that the circuit court 3-judge panel, 2 out of the 3 judges, said that James Huntsman has a leg to stand on, and that a reasonable juror could conclude that President Hinckley's statements, in particular around the building of the City Creek Mall, could be interpreted when President Hinckley and others said that no tithing would be used for the City Creek Mall. The 2 out of the 3 judges said, yes, a reasonable juror could conclude that those statements included all tithing, not just the interest on tithing. That's why it was sent back down. Now, the church has appealed that. What's your initial thoughts on the James Huntsman fraud lawsuit here, Peter?
Oh, I'm so proud of him persisting with it, and so much is going to depend on the honesty and integrity of those judges to hold that line, because the church will be in full panic mode, trying to preserve its wealth from everyone trying to get it back. Here in Britain, we had a sort of an early go at this. So a few years ago, Tom Phillips, who was a state president, who's quite famous for being the first to talk in modern times about receiving the second anointing, and Steve Blore, who is my sister's bishop in Cornwall, who left the church and became disillusioned over the history being hidden. They teamed up to have a court case in London at the time President Monson was president, to try and get their tithing back. And the basis of their claim was the truth claims of the church, the Great Floods, things, Book of Abraham, things that you can demonstrably prove were not true. And it kind of got thrown out because the basis of their claim was telling false stories in order to get money, which, when you are going to preserve religious freedom, gets very shaky. But the difference here is these court cases are based upon actual fraud, charity fraud, saying, please give us your money. This is what we do with it. This is what we do spend tithing money on. This is what we don't spend tithing money on. And we all heard President Hinckley gave 2 general conference talks. I featured them in my podcast along the way. So this is a topic dear to my heart, where he absolutely said no tithing money would be involved in anything to do with City Creek. And we now know that all along they had kind of underwritten the project, that if it went pear-shaped financially, the church would bail it out. And I think the thing everyone needs to remember that doesn't get said enough when this case is discussed is the church has now admitted, and the whistleblower said, that there is no distinction within the Ensign Peak funds between live tithing donations and the interest earned on it. What happens every year is members pay about $7 billion tithing. $5 billion is used for the entire budget and expenditure of the church. The spare $2 billion goes straight into Ensign Peak and it starts to be invested. But there is no separate pot. There's no this is the literal money you gave directly into your tithing envelope here. and we're not spending that on investments and commercial stuff, and then here's the money we've made as profit. It just goes all into the one pot, and the money gets invested and makes a huge profit, and all of the profits then get reinvested. So people need, the simplest thing I feel people need to understand is Ensign Peak is tithing, that you literally went out of your bank account straight to Ensign Peak, 20% of it, or whatever percentage it is, plus the profits made, and it's all mushed together. There is no difference. Ensign Peak is tithing.
Absolutely.
Therefore,
Yeah.
of course, James Huntsman has a case because they lied about that. And so I just hope it goes all the way. And lots of us are watching this. There are other lawsuits and class action lawsuits brewing. I can't say too much.
Okay. Oh, okay.
It's going to kick off. This is just the beginning of what will become, I think, a global waterfall of efforts to get your tithing back. Not on the basis that the church lied to you about its religious beliefs, but it lied to you about what it was doing with it. Here in Britain, to have tax-exempt status, the church has to make public financial declarations to the Charity Commission, similar to what happens in Canada. So we can track it. You can go online now and you can see how much money the church took in tithing, how much money they've spent from Ensign Peak, shifting money from Salt Lake back here to buy massive commercial investments in London, £103 million spent on an office block called Alder Castle, 70 million spent on an Amazon warehouse, while my last ward, Welling, which has been here since 1841, still does not have a chapel, after the church repeatedly underbid on the land we found for it. So this larger story of the finances of the church, I'm absolutely in the epicenter of the crime that it is. It's charity fraud. And I was a ward clerk for years, shoveling really generous donations from people on pensions, on welfare, to the Perpetual Education Funds, to the Temple Funds, to humanitarian aid. And we know from those declarations to the Charity Commission, none of that money was ever spent on those things. Total of 5 million over the last 10 years, which doesn't sound a lot, but that's a huge percentage for the average members in Britain. And then last year, they just shoved it all back to Salt Lake with no accountability for how it was spent. So we know they're performing charity fraud. They're saying, we will give us this money for these purposes, and then they're not spending it on those purposes. And the Perpetual Education Fund thing was a complete sham and has collapsed under the weight of its own incompetence, as other podcasts have been documenting. So this isn't conceptual, I'm offended because the church is rich. I've spent the last 10 years or 10 years or more worshipping out of a cupboard in a ward that is nearly 200 years old, nomads hiring grotty places and schools to meet in, when the church could have bought them a palace and chose to buy palaces up the road, like 20 minutes drive away. Alder Castle, it's even called a castle, for goodness sake.
Yeah, money generating. The church bought money generating assets in England, whereas a chapel does not generate income in the same manner.
No.
Let me just share one other spot from the really good thoughts there, Peter. Let me just share one other spot, one other passage from this, and that's from the Salt Lake Tribune article. And we link to all these in our show notes, by the way. In a petition filed late Wednesday seeking a rehearing before the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, the church attorney says the legal dispute over tithing and spending on the City Creek Shopping Center and Mall in downtown Salt Lake City in the early 2000s has, quote, created a profound threat to religious liberty, end quote, one potentially affecting all churches. And going on, quote, virtually any person who has fallen away from their faith may view their donations to the church during their faithful years as a waste. But that cannot mean each of them has a fraud claim that allows them to try to convince a secular jury that they were swindled. Now, I want to give a couple thoughts on this. Number one, in the United States in particular, when you give money to a religious institution, you have almost no claim on that money whatsoever. The church could literally take that money and put it into President Nelson's car, into the first presidency jet, into enriching the senior leaders of the church. That there's been no evidence that has taken place, but that would be perfectly legal. In the United States, you don't have to spend that money on anything. You can just sit there and hoard it in perpetuity. So yes, based upon those things, James Huntsman would not have a case, but this is different. Because the church, what you can't do in the United States is you can't say, we're going to take your donation and do X with it and then do something else with it. Or you can't say, we're not going to use your donation for Y and then use it for Y. So if the church had just maintained silence on this, if they had said nothing about the Cedar Creek Mall, then James Huntsman and a lot of other people would have no leg to stand on. The difference is that the church said no tithing would be used for Cedar Creek Mall, and we're using your tithing to for basically humanitarian purposes. And those things are demonstrably false now, and that's why this case is going forward. Your last take on this lawsuit here, Peter?
Everybody, remember, this is an international church. You know, there's so much in what goes on in Mormon discourse that's all about the local politics and laws and so on of the USA or of the state of Utah. There are millions of us, dwindling, but millions of us in other countries with other legal jurisdictions, and we don't like charity fraud. So the church should be very afraid. I want my money back, you bastards. And I will not rest till I get it. And I'm not alone. And you know, I think the church realizes this. You know, they must have a sense. Well, maybe they don't, because they're so stupid. So many of their decisions are just incompetent in their whole system. This is what happens when bureaucracies get bloated. But ultimately, justice finds a way. And they have committed so many charity fraud, acts in so many ways that eventually one of these cases is going to stick and it will open a floodgate. So you can understand why the church is wanting to hoard money now, because when you get a perfect storm of people coming for their tithing because of their lies, and they coming for their compensation and punitive damages because of a relentless system of child abuse and enabling child abusers and covering up child abuse in every country, and the Boy Scouts of America entanglements in that field, they must know they're about to get severely hit by a lot of very expensive lawsuits. So they keep saying they're holding on to this money for the sake of keeping the mission of the church going in the millennium. They raised the amount that missionaries have to pay to serve during COVID. So that's nonsense. That's not why they're holding the money to keep the work of the church going. I think it's just simply they know they're about to lose nearly all of it in lawsuits, if they have any common sense. So far, I'm not seeing a shred of evidence of any common sense going on in the church office building. So it's going to be wild. The next few years are going to be absolutely fascinating. Keep watching this show. It's going to be amazing.
And the Mormon Civil War. Yeah, and the Mormon Civil War as well.
Yes, thank you.
hey, two last articles before we get to Tim Ballard. Let's cover two quick last articles here. And, Peter, were you celebrating Moroni Day? Because just on September 21st, 2023, that's the 200th anniversary of the Angel Moroni first visiting Joseph Smith. Don't forget to leave your green jello and funeral potatoes out before you go to bed. You know, it's kind of like Santa Claus, you know? Or how about a couple of other takes here? September 21st is a sacred day for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day-Saints. Oh, right, because that's when Joseph Smith was visited by the Angel Moroni. Wait a minute. No, it's not. It's actually the day commemorating when BYU will now sell caffeinated soda on campus, September 21st. You tell me which one's more important,
that is so
Peter.
much fun. I'm still not a fan of Coke. It really makes me ill, and it has phosphoric acid in. No one should touch that stuff. So I'll go with the Moroni one. But what no one's mentioned, of course, is it's the autumn equinox. The reason this is the date for Moroni Day is that Joseph Smith was up to his eyeballs in superstitious occult stuff. And at the autumn equinox, the boundary between, our world and the spiritual dimensions is meant to be thinner. But that's not getting a mention in any of the publicity about it. But the really, very significant thing that's happening now is I was just watching earlier the thing the Church News put out with the church historian Carmel S. McKay and the Keith Erickson, who's the church's historical outreach lead, being interviewed. And they're talking about how the first vision was maybe the beginning of the redemption of Joseph, but the actual real restoration of the church begins, there we go, with the visitation of Moroni. And this is what all the skeptics and critics of the church have been predicting, because the first vision is totally discredited now. There are no contemporary records, journals, mentions anywhere of it until 1832. The story we get told that Joseph was persecuted and he told his family all about it. None of them mentioned it. No one had heard of this first vision till 2 years after the church was established. So it seems to have been invented later, or if it happened, he kept it very quiet. And the Gospel Topics essays have basically admitted this. So the first vision that the first generation of Latter-day Saints understood was this one, when Moroni came, when Joseph was 17 or whatever age he was, no one knows. So here we have the official narrative now being carefully and subtly readjusted. So they're still mentioning the first vision, but it's in a different category now. President Hinckley, in our hearing, everyone who was alive at the time, declared in General Conference that the first vision is the start of the restoration, and our whole religion stands or falls on whether that event really happened as described. But now you're seeing them realize they can't defend that position anymore, so they're going to shift the narrative that the restoration began with Moroni's visit. So much more honest to the timeline. Well done. Unavoidable because the first vision is discredited. I'm just so looking forward to how they're going to sell this to everyone, and
Hey,
whether the members will just do their usual mental gymnastics and not be bothered by this change.
let's hear what they're saying
Stay
here.
within the covers of the book,
Mm.
but for the reader, her or himself, to go to God and ask for more.
So the restoration is ongoing, including the restoration of his people. And we're still figuring it out, and God is being patient while we figure it out. And in 1894, Wilford Woodruff stands at the pulpit and says, we have not got through Revelation. We have not got through the work of God. And then you see things that are happening. If you haven't seen ongoing restoration since President Nelson has been prophet, you've been fast asleep.
Yep. President Wilford Woodruff also said you have to be polygamous if you're going to get to heaven. This was a couple of years before for the manifesto. So yeah, right. Oh,
Well,
it's so nuts. President Nelson, the great revelator, changing meetings around. Hurrah! It's new scripture. I mean, honestly, it's sad, isn't it?
Well, like I said, you want to
Bless them.
celebrate Moroni Day or the day where BYU served caffeinated beverages? You know, you want to talk about staying ahead of now. That truly is the ongoing restoration. The fact that BYU sells pop now, we call it pop where I'm from, by the way, Peter. But when it comes to celebrating, Moroni Day, I think that Scripture Central actually has the best way to do it, and that's to attend the. This is sold out, the $250 a plate dinner here with Elder Razban on Moroni Day. Scripture Central invites you to Moroni Day, 200th anniversary of the first visit to Joseph Smith. You only have to pay $250 to celebrate Moroni Day and hear an apostle speak, Peter. That seems like a bargain.
They've just normalized feeding at the trough. You mentioned earlier there's no evidence of President Nelson and his family getting rich from tithing. Oh, give over. Look at this stuff. They used to be selling books that would be a side hassle. Apostles, apart from Stevenson, used to be able to continue having loads of business interests. They made a fortune sitting on the boards of church-owned companies that they take a normal board member's salary until President Hinckley, I think, put a stop to that. But they made an exception for Stevenson just because he's too rich to do that to him. I mean, please, President Holland stood in London recently and said, how they leave their nets to come and serve as apostles. Yeah, unless you're very rich, in which case you can carry on sitting on the board of IFIT. I mean, they give the church jobs with money to their relatives in the whole bureaucracy. Loads of sons and son-in-laws are called as mission presidents, which basically piles a huge amount of money into that family for 3 years. They get a full general authority salary with huge expenses accounts that in total can add up to about $250,000. And it's nearly all fun money because the church is buying the groceries and the petrol and paying for the kids' university costs. So the epic failure of the LDS related journalists in Utah to not go after where the Enzyme Peak money is being invested. If you have 7 billion profit from Enzyme Peak that we know about, plus 2 billion surplus tithing every year, $9 billion new to invest in new things every year. How do you even do that? It's like those movies where you're given $1 million, you have to spend it in a day, and it's actually really hard. They must be shoveling money into companies and businesses owned by friends and relatives of the general authorities, shoveling it. And if any investigative journalists worth their salt should have been all over that by now, and they haven't been. It's low-hanging fruit for your Pulitzer Prizes. So I might join in the criticism of Peggy Fletcher Stack for not doing her job properly.
Oh boy, Peter.
That Jacob Hanson's indulged in, which we'll get to.
Boy, you're not afraid to pull any. You don't pull any punches. That is the great thing about the Mormon Civil War.
I love Peggy to bits, and I've said this to her in messages. Like, you're missing stuff. You should be terrifying these apostles. They should be begging for interviews with you because you've set the agenda. by doing proper investigative journalism into the epic corruption. Utah has the highest levels of affinity fraud in America. The
And
FBI got so
bankruptcy.
fed up. Yeah, and got so fed up, like air miling their operatives to Utah to deal with it. They just opened an office in Salt Lake. There's a video about it online, with I think the Utah governor as part of the video. Like, it's such a huge issue, and warning everyone that, hello, Utah is the affinity fraud capital of the world. And what we're going to get into with Tim Ballard is like affinity fraud on just more of it. It's all affinity fraud.
Yeah, we're
And
definitely
it's the
going to get
same
into that.
dysfunction.
Yeah, let's get into that. Let me give you one last meme that goes along with this Moroni Day, because Peter, I couldn't afford the $250 dinner. I don't have enough Patreons for that. And by the way, the
Give
Mormon
him more money.
No, please don't. That's fine. I'm good.
Yes, give him money.
I don't need to get the money and then give it to Scripture Central. Scripture Central is being funded by the foundation that the church gives money to, the foundation, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Foundation. They give that money to Scripture Central. They're giving them $1 million. They don't need my $250 a plate dinner, right? But here's my last meme that goes along with this Moroni Day here. 200 years ago today, a treasure hunting farm boy couldn't sleep, and now I have religious trauma. That's kind of sad.
Yeah.
Now, one last article. I know that you and the presenters in particular have looked very carefully at sexual abuse, and that you've done a number of very, very important things that have taken so much time, so much sacrifice, so much effort for years of activism within the church, trying to complete the impossible, which is reform the church on child sex abuse. And unfortunately, a high-profile case came to our attention this week here, and it's David George McConkie. He's a former LDS stake president, LDS bishop. He was a deputy district attorney in Colorado. And what's the LDS connection that's very important here, Peter?
Well, he's a descendant of Bruce R. McConkie, one of the of Curtin McConkie fame, although he doesn't seem to have been employed there personally. But yeah, so it's so sad, and we know there's been all kinds of allegations about abuse within the Monson family, within the Nelson family, when Nelson insisted on the social media fast of all the women in the church. Happened to be the week that there was a lot of publicity around allegations about his own daughter or granddaughter being involved in abuse. This is just an illness, a dysfunction running through the church for several reasons. And it impacts every family, and it's awful. There are a percentage of human beings who end up being abusive, and it's not an easy thing to manage for any family. So I have great sympathy for people as collateral damage in these situations. But again, you then think, could it have been stopped? And what usually comes out in these cases is there were plenty of warnings, that there were many earlier opportunities to have stopped abuse. And because of being well connected, because of being part of Mormon royalty, because of the general culture in the church of concealing and covering up abuse to avoid embarrassment, more people were harmed. And so, yeah, they won't learn. They're just not learning. But what we have accomplished here in Britain is, through a dance of public pressure and activism and insider people playing ball, we've actually changed the policy in Britain that all church members working with young people will have to have background checks, police checks, and a much healthier amount of safeguarding training than the church's own system, which is totally inadequate. So I'm delighted about that. We can make change happen, and that's kind of what Mormon Civil War is about. That's what 21st Century Saints, who spearheaded that campaign, are about. Nemo the Mormon, Priest of Dispatches, who's kind of having a rest from it at the moment, and the British Sunstone team have all teamed up. We call ourselves the Brit Vengers. I've got my t-shirt on. There we go. And we are, we're proving that activism works. It can. If you're speaking truth and you're persistent and a bit canny, there are enough insiders in the church who know these changes need to happen as well, that you can move the dial. You can make something so untenable the church has to change. And we've had that victory, and 21st Century Saints are offering training now. They're about to put out a film. We had this wonderful seminar with lots of different voices from different perspectives, offering advice about what safeguarding that is gold standard looks like and how you can bring it about. So we're hoping that we can help that spread into other countries in the church to bring about those changes. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, well,
there's
so
hope.
you proved the fact that despite what Elder Corbett has said, that activism within the
Mm,
church works, and despite what
absolutely.
Elder Oakes has said, that there is a loyal opposition within the church, and that it's been very
Mm,
effective. You see, what I find remarkable about the David McConkey thing is unfortunate, sad reality is there's many of these cases that happen almost every single day, for sure, every single week.
mm,
But the church, you
yeah.
know, the amazing thing about this Tim Ballard thing is this is what John Dehlin tweeted out. It says, you know that the Mormon church is in trouble if the news story of Bruce R. McConkey's stake president grandson being imprisoned for child abuse is a relatively uninteresting story for the week. I mean, this should have been front page
Mm,
news, but it's been dwarfed by Tim
mhm,
Ballard. And I just want to say one last thing before I'm going to let you have the final take on this. This stake president,
mm,
Mr. McConkey here, he wasn't denounced by the church. He wasn't repudiated. He wasn't disavowed. He's been arrested, not just allegations. Tim Ballard, as we're going to find out, had some allegations that were investigated by the FBI, by the
mhm,
Davis Police Department. No charges were brought. But this faithful Latter-day Saint, who's been in a high ordained position and is
mm,
extremely
yeah.
prominent in the church, he's not condemned. He's given
Mm,
a total pass. What's the
mm,
difference? Why?
mm. Because he wasn't criticizing the leaders of the church. I was excommunicated for it. Um, that's it. You know, it's what are the priorities of this organization? It's protecting the organization, making it rich, protecting its reputation. But in doing that by nefarious means, they actually set up a minefield of truth bombs that then go off and destroy the church. And that's all happening now. So it's a terrible strategy. It's been a complete disaster for them. Because the internet has empowered everyone to get access to the information they're trying to keep from the members. So it's completely suicidal. It's self-destructing. It's incompetent. And they're until they learn to just choose honesty and apology, um, they 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 are going to lose their entire global membership. You know,
Yeah.
this is an existential struggle for the survival of the church. It's happening on our watch. If you care about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints surviving, look around you. The kids are leaving younger and younger. They're not signing up for seminary. They're not doing institute. They're having a terrible time on their mission. Most of them aren't going on missions now. 80% of the young people we raise in the church 10 or 20 years ago were leaving by age 30, and that average has come down a lot since then. You know, it's not working. None of this is working. There isn't a single thing the church is doing institutionally that's actually working right now. You can't find one. As soon as you investigate the details, all of it, humanitarian aid, missionary work, the whole lot is a mess of corruption and amateur incompetence. And so for me, I think the only hope is, are enough local leadership class members looking around at this destruction of everything they've spent the last decades building up, it's all going now. Will they have the courage to start actually blaming the incompetent management and leaders and replace them? Or will they just fall for the script to always blame themselves, blame the world, and blame the people who leave for being weak? You know, we
And
need to get off that script, guys.
they blame Tim Ballard. And that does take us to
Yes.
our featured article of the week here, which is the
Yeah.
Tim Ballard zaniness has burned down the Bloggernacle. And for those of you who haven't been following this, you know what? I got this meme here. I don't know who Tim Ballard is or what he did or said, but at this point, I'm just too afraid to ask. That may be some of you out there that haven't been following this, but let me give you a brief sum up here for Tim Ballard. He was associated with an organization called Operation Underground Railroad, which supposedly claimed to fight sex trafficking. He was part Ballard's crowdfunded film called Sound of Freedom came out last year and was basically talked about his organization. The film put a new level of scrutiny on Tim Ballard, and recently the church has issued a rare public rebuke of him, claiming that he used the name of Apostle M. Russell Ballard, no relation, inappropriately. Then right-wing church member Glenn Beck, he got involved with this whole thing. Then the Vice reporting showed that Ballard was forced to resign over numerous claims of at least 7 women of sexual misconduct. That's the basic summarization of who Tim Ballard is. And, you know, if you Google Tim Ballard at the beginning of the week, he used to be a popular speaker here, Peter, which he was part of the AA speakers. But no, he's been fired off of their website. He's no longer part of the allamericanspeakers.com. He's gone. So the church is repudiating him. He's getting repudiated all over the place. What's your first thoughts on the Tim Ballard fiasco that has taken place over the last week and a half?
I think it just shows it's the affinity fraud thing. The church engenders a gullibility in people, and people will come and feast on that as predators. that you have a magical worldview, that you love to, as a distraction from dealing with the problems in your own church, you're going to be like, oh, Satan's out there roaming the world. You've got the whole QAnon affiliated stuff here. You know, it's Trumpism, it's QAnon, it's the idea of global conspiracies of sexual predators harvesting children for their adrenaline bloods or whatever it is. And all of that has sort of contributed to the perfect storm of what Tim Ballard was able to do. And it is this really fascinating overlap into kind of pseudo spirituality or pseudo science as well, that he's consulting a psychic to talk to Nephi about where to find the missing children. And I'm
Right.
like, when did Mormons and all the stuff you've been covering about Jody Hillebrand and so on, the physical violence against people believed to be possessed by Satan, when did Mormons pick up on the worst excesses of evangelical Christians in Africa, sort of mixing up their traditional religions about evil spirits and possession with Christianity, and literally being violent to children to get their and murders, even here in Britain? How did Mormons ever connect with that? I mean, if someone had said to me 10 years ago, this is going to be a Mormon thing, my jaw would have hit the floor. But this has been the gateway drug, and I think it comes from the church creates a need, a craving in our members, because we say, God is still speaking to us. Revelation is real. Miracles are now. And we're doing it better than any of these other Christians. But the leadership are providing nothing. There's no meaty revelations about anything meaningful for a century. They're not having miracles. They're downplaying them now. They're teaching about you having the faith not to be healed rather than to be healed, which is like the ultimate cop-out of that. And they condemn you for being annoyed about this. So, of course, you've got this whole body of intentionally undereducated or underinformed people who are seeking the spirituality and miraculousness and sense of mission and purpose. So anyone who comes along says, well, I've got it. I've got crystal healing for you. I've got alternate spiritual practices. Women, particularly, who are denied the ability to give healings in the church now, will go and find a way to do it in alternate practices. And with that comes, and that, all the things that fundamentalist Mormons have always picked up on, the idea that our generation is the most exciting. The second coming is going to come around when we're alive, a mistake Christians have been making for 2,000 years and being exploited with. It's all happening now. Everything really matters, and particularly American-centric, which again annoys those of us who are in the international church. We're like, this is Christ's church, not the Church of the USA. Why are you the chosen people? And having that sense of purpose and mission. So Tim Ballard comes along, I'll fix it all. I'm going to go and rescue these children from the international QAnon conspiracy of child trafficking. I will provide an alternate displacement activity for your mind to go, instead of thinking about the fact that our church did this stuff. Joseph Smith was sexually trafficking teenagers. Huge numbers of young women were trafficked from Britain to become your ancestors. We were kind of joking in the Brit Vengers that the British pageant, which just happened here, should be called Sex Trafficking the Musical, because literally everyone in it featured, all of the characters by name who were real people, some of them weren't, either died very quickly or ended up within a few years in polygamous families. So it feels to me like this is a displacement activity for the collective population of multi-generational families descended from polygamists in Utah, to think they're fixing this thing that bothers them a lot, because there is that somewhere in their psyche, there's that nagging feeling that actually we did all this stuff and we're still justifying it. We're still making excuses for the sexual exploitation of children. So that's my big picture amateur psychoanalysis of what on earth you're going through there, you poor things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's watch a little bit. The church issued a strong rebuke of Tim Ballard here, and let's watch a little bit of it. I'm not sure if this will survive the copyright strikes, but we're going to play it anyway, and let's get your reaction.
He is the famous founder of Operation Undercover Railroad and the inspiration for the movie Sound of Freedom. But now he's being rebuked by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Church officials are saying that Tim Ballard used the names of high-ranking leaders to advance his own personal and financial interests. 2 News' Paul Nelson live near the church headquarters with more tonight. And Paul, which leaders are being named?
Well, according to Vice, Tim Ballard claims he was in constant communication with acting president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, M. Russell Ballard. Those two men are not related. Now, the church did release a statement saying that those two men did have a friendship, but that friendship is in the past. According to the Vice article, Tim Ballard claimed Elder Ballard played a central role in Operation Underground Railroad. The article states Ballard also claimed the acting president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles was partnering with him on other ventures, like groups named Slave Stealers and Liberty 89. The supposed goal of those organizations was to use the popularity raised through the rescue missions to sway people toward the LDS faith. The article states he left OUR earlier this year following an internal investigation into employee complaints about his conduct at virtually the same moment that Sound of Freedom, a fictionalized version of his purported child rescuing exploits, became a surprise box office hit. Ballard is the central character of the movie Sound of Freedom, which depicted the rescue of a little girl away from child traffickers. However, church officials released this statement about Elder Ballard's connection to the OUR founder, saying, in part, quote, "The nature of that relationship was always in support of vulnerable children being abused, trafficked, and otherwise neglected. Once it became clear Tim Ballard had betrayed their friendship through the unauthorized use of President Ballard's name for Tim Ballard's personal advantage and activity regarded as morally unacceptable, President Ballard withdrew his association. President Ballard never authorized his name or the name of the church to be used for Tim's personal or financial interest," end quote. The statement also says the church never endorsed, supported, or represented OUR, Tim Ballard, or any projects associated with them. However, in 2015, the church published an article about Ballard, saying his faith in Jesus Christ was the reason he founded Operation Underground Railroad. Now, Vice also reported on the investigation being done into Tim Ballard by the Davis County Attorney's Office. We reached out to Davis County Attorney Troy Rawlings, who told us he was not available for a dialogue at this time. You can read the church's full statement on our website, KUTV.com. Reporting live, Paul Nelson, KUTV 2.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, Peter, but the cardinal sin
Yeah.
of Mormonism is to talk about a senior leader of the church in even the most slightly unflattering light, as you well know.
Yeah. And it's the, it just rings so many bells about Paul H. Dunn, who used his connection and credibility as a general authority to engage in a massive insurance fraud operation. He'd turn up in people's homes, be like, you know me, the church is great with this, I'm honest and trustworthy. And you can justify anything that way, and you can understand the absolutely, we all grow up in the church with this idea that anything we can do to bring positive attention to the church is worth it. You just always want that sort of PR win from whatever you're doing. So he could justify all kinds of unethical behaviors because he's like, maybe this is what he was thinking if he was being honest about it. Well, but this is going to make the church look great. I'm a Mormon. I'm getting all this attention. We're being part of the solution to the world's most awful problems. Therefore, it's okay. And having that idea of making the church look good or furthering its name helps you to morally cover up or reconcile yourself to some sometimes very unethical methods. And I think that happens on missions as well. Sometimes there can be a big pressure for numbers rather than a genuine conversion process to occur. So that's kind of what stood out for me there, is the idea of that this would help the church's good name, and that the church inspired me to do this. So it becomes this feedback loop of a good excuse for the inexcusable.
Yeah. There's been a lot of social media reactions to this from the week. It's dominated the news cycle. And I got this tweet here from LDS Discussions from Mike, who runs that website over there. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is trying to kneecap Tim Ballard before he can run for Senate because they know that he will bring a lot of bad attention to the Mormon church. And a lot of the extreme members of the church has cultivated are melting down over this. Now, remember, the church is a 501(c), which means that you can't get involved into politics. Otherwise, your tax exempt status could be called into question. So if they're going to denounce Tim Ballard, it has to be done before he starts running for office.
Yeah.
That's why, in my opinion, this is what nobody's talking about. They rushed this out because his Senate bid looked like it was imminent. And after he starts running for Senate, well, you can't get involved with the politics. Otherwise, there could be a problem.
And I'm politically, I'm not liberal. I've always voted Conservative. I'm a mad keen Brexiteer. So I'm not coming from what the Conservatives in America would stereotype as a standard Democrat or sort of left-wing worldview. But my gosh, the state your politics is in, if the best candidate you can get to replace Mitt Romney is Tim Ballard, and no one else is really stepping into the fray. I mean, it just shows, the problem that the whole Republican Party has with the Trump faction, inheritors of the Tea Party and all of that. And the majority of us here in Britain and Europe have just watched the absolute parade of clowns that has been American politics for the last while, with our jaws hitting the floor. I mean, it's hilariously funny. It makes us feel incredibly smug because Americans think they're the only country on the earth with functioning democracy and so on. And we're like, you guys are a basket case compared to our normal, and you think, especially Mormon Americans are like so arrogant, like we're the land of the free and the chosen one and all of that. It's like, it's not looking like it, guys. You're slaves to your employers. You have hardly any time off work. Loads of you don't even have basic education or healthcare. And your politics is trapped in a two-party system that has polarized everything to extremes. That is not a healthy democracy. You're not winning at the moment, guys. And to then have people who have more PR celebrity than actual political sense or political passion and commitment be the best candidates for winning in that crazy polarized world. I just feel so sorry, but it is also a tragedy. The world freedom is falling in the world. There's a major resurgence of the imperial dictatorships in China, in Russia, in all over the place. We need America to be a healthy beacon on the hill. We need them to be the light, the inspiration, the example of how to have disagreements, to have feisty politics, but still not actually go to war about it, or just to be free and protect rights and freedoms. But where America weakens and doesn't provide that sure voice in the world, everyone else suffers, and they start to internalize and they become insular and they stop caring about what goes on globally, but then it bites them in the bum and you end up with a world war where America has to come to the rescue at incredible cost. And you're starting to see these trends that of weakening support for the struggle in Ukraine, which could be their easiest win. For a very small amount of your military budget, you could completely deplete Russia's ability to make mischief for a long time and preserve a free country, but you're agonizing over whether to give them aeroplanes, and it's really worrying. Every day I'm checking the Ukraine news feed, so what goes on politically in America really impacts us in the rest of the world. It shifts the balances of power, and it's not going to a good place right now. So we need you guys to step up and have much healthier people running for office and being elected. So we do keep an eye on what's going on there.
Yeah, as far as wait a minute. As far as healthy people running for office, you did have a guy as a prime minister named Boris Johnson, right? So this is the
yeah, right. Okay, here's the difference between Johnson and Trump. They both had wacky hair. I'll acknowledge that, and are great personalities. Boris Johnson actually wrote history books about Roman politics and speaks Latin. I don't think Donald Trump can do that. And he turned out to be a twit. But the health of our system, we got rid of him. The Conservative Party is ruthless. They even knifed Maggie Thatcher when she went nuts. We have a healthy democracy is one where when the leader goes crazy, you get them out of power in weeks, not have to drag out more general elections where they keep coming back. So yes, we have our own crazies, but we get rid of them fast, and your system can't do that. And that's a major difference.
Well, all I can say, we're kind of getting off on a tangent. All I can say is Trump is facing Donald Trump is facing 91 indictments. So as far as holding him accountable, all I can say is don't hold your breath, okay? Because
it's only 91.
The other shoe may drop. But let's just get back to what the Tim Ballard here thing. We got off on a divergent here. There was a lot of doubts about the Vice News reporting on this. He said, somebody wrote an email to Vice News, and that doesn't mean that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints condemned Tim Ballard. And they're saying that the Salt Lake Tribune and, like you said, Peggy Fletcher Stack, they're saying, is people still reading this fake news rag? In other words, because the church never, as to my knowledge, has never really publicly condemned a member of the church who is in good standing in this bizarre manner, people are saying this is fake news. It can't be believed. And Vice News is extremely left-leaning. They're pretty hostile again to people of faith. So they're saying, no, this is all fake news until I read it from the church, or until until it's another section of the Doctrine and Covenants, until it is canonized. I'm not going to believe this fake news rag. It's just incredible what people won't believe.
Yeah. But amazingly, and this is why it's getting so interesting, Quaco came to the rescue. He charged in saying, well, actually, this is real statement. It's actually happened. I don't know if you're going to show his amazing tweet.
Well, the thing
about,
is, I was going to show it. I was going to show that he said that. The problem is he took those tweets down, Peter. He took the tweets
Ah,
down. He took a
yeah.
lot of his tweets down. But Peggy Fletcher Stack, she did weigh into this, and she got very, very salty here. She said, if you think the LDS Church's condemnation of Tim Ballard, given to media outlets, including the Salt Lake Tribune and Deseret News, came from a rogue spokesperson and what is not approved by the faith as highest authority, then you don't understand how the church and its leaders work. That's about as salty as she's ever gotten that I've ever read.
Yeah. And she's absolutely right. And this is why the people sort of in the more dissident space are just loving this. We got the popcorn out and we are absolutely enjoying this deliciously, because for the first time, the people in the QAnon sort of right wing, whatever you want to call it, socially conservative, super TBM bubble are being having one of their heroes being treated the way our heroes have been treated for decades. And they can't believe it's real. And they can't conceptualize that their church would be this callous and cruel to someone that used to be promoted as an insider. And the rest of us are like, oh, welcome to our world. You know, that's what happened to Bill Reel and John DeLynn and David Archuleta and everyone else. Everybody who used to be fundamental to the church's PR operation, who then in any way criticized the leaders, or became an embarrassment. They dropped like a hot rock and the church suddenly switches narrative. Welcome to the mental gymnastics, crazy people. Welcome to what we already know about this institution. So it's going to be really interesting to see if some of their tone changes. Probably won't, but you know, Midnight Mormons and everyone else, are they going to actually clue up that these people, this bandwagon they've been on, can also turn on them? That it can absolutely bite them in the bum as well, and they could be next for the chopping block, because this institution is ruthless to anyone who seems to be causing them trouble, and they don't care how loyal you've been or how much money they've made from you in the past. And you know, Jacob Hansen of that website, you know, he commented on Peggy's thing. Yeah, thoughtful faith, not being very thoughtful, called Peggy Fletcher Stack a godbeite hack.
Right.
So I had to root around Google to remind myself what a godbeite is.
Me too.
Godby was a kind of an old back in the day critic of the leadership of the church in the pioneer era. So just they're so rude and awful, you know, all this, oh, we're the nice Mormons, but we'll swear and whatever at the people we don't like. But their foolishness is they're not fact-checking first. They all look ridiculous now because it was a real statement from the church. Yes. It would have been very easy for them to find that out. Yes. But they're so high on their own ego, they can't be bothered to actually just be sure before they sound off. And then they have to withdraw all the tweets. I mean, it's yeah, I feel terrible for them. The poor things, how they are suffering.
Yeah, the Vice News also keeps there's going to be more articles here from Anna Merlin here and Tim Marchman's, but Tim Ballard's departure from his Operation Underground Railroad followed sexual misconduct investigation. So he supposedly, Peter, this is an allegation here, he supposedly took women with him for this child rescue, for the child enslavement. He took women with him who were supposed to be his wives, as you know, being undercover, but then he pressured them into taking showers with him and sleeping with him in the same bed. There was a number of sexual harassment complaints against him, disturbingly specific from these women here. He coerced them to participate in sexual acts with him under the premise of going wherever it takes and doing whatever it takes to save a child. Now, these are all allegations at this point in time, but this is a disturbing trend that we're seeing from Tim Ballard. Why is it that it seems like every time, you know, it's like the Doctrine and Covenants. What is it? Section 121. As soon as a man gets a little bit of power, he begins to immediately exercise unrighteous dominion. Is that 121?
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And this is Joseph Smith's flaws all over again, that every time you get a man who's kind of being a full-on alpha male, who is getting influence and power and feeling empowered, it nearly always turns to sexual exploitation of women if they're heterosexual. You know, it just every time you're just waiting for the sex scandal when someone enters that space. And, you know, it doesn't take long listening to these people to realize they're a bit up themselves and not necessarily being entirely honest. So I think it's sadly, it's a tale as old as time. You know, it always ends up being, I deserve sexual experiences because I'm powerful and I'm successful and I'm popular. Right, who am I going to have sex with now? You know, it just seems to be part of alpha male psychology that's the inevitable next step. And I was listening this morning to some of a new episode that RFM's put out, Radio Free Mormon, with a guy who went on one of these Operation Underground operations in Latin America, and he's describing how in their undercover role, all these good Mormon police officers and operatives and so on were going to nightclubs, getting high on booze and cocaine, having lap dances, going off with some of the prostitutes individually, allegedly to glean information, usually on the basis of nothing whatsoever. They had no leads or anything, so they're trying to find something. And it's just like, you guys this is soaking all over again. You are Mormon men who found an excuse to do all the naughty things, but label it as acceptable to God. So you can absolutely see how that quickly spun out for an alpha male predator like Tim Ballard, if that's what he was doing, to start manipulating people into bed.
Yeah,
there's nothing new about this in human psychology. It's almost inevitable,
and it's not just random Twitter accounts that have a hard time believing that Tim Ballard had been condemned in this manner. Tim Ballard himself said that he released this video where he was up in Boston, and he denounced and he said, there is no one out there. There's no news outlet that can convict me of this. This is not from the church. This didn't happen this way. He's he's not the only one who has a hard time understanding why in the world did the church react in this particularly odd manner in a way that has never happened before. Tim himself said he didn't believe it.
I don't buy it. He can't be that stupid, to get to that level of wealth, manipulating people, and understanding the vulnerabilities of people with power and influence, whose name he has been, building a business empire on. Of course, he knows the deal. He knows what's going on. This is all PR fluff, and he will be quickly proven to be not being honest in what he said. It's already happening. The evidence is coming out. So it's just all this game. It's how people play the media in that kind of a space. But when you are trying to convince a demographic of believers and followers who are not informed, you kind of get away with silly propaganda. They're not going to sit there and listen to this analysis and actually open some websites. They're just going to pick up a few things they saw on telly quickly, as you just saw as a clip on the news, and they'll just pick a side based on their previous loyalties and assumptions. And so you still sort of get away with things. This is the world of celebrity and shallow news, which we're all vulnerable to and need to kind of train ourselves. And I'm a teacher, I'm a high school teacher, and we try hard at school to train our young people to be internet savvy. In history, they learn about sources and the credibility and biases of sources and how to navigate that sort of thing. And I think in an information overload world, you have to have those skills. And it's really sad that the church has chosen to run with keeping people extremely vulnerable to that kind of manipulation, because it makes it easier for the general authorities to manipulate them than to actually empower people with enough skepticism and the skills of rational analysis to sift the wheat from the chaff and to make wiser decisions about what to trust. And you have really senior voices in this space. We're watching it live as their naivety and their ignorance and their scripts that the church has fed them are all falling apart and going up in flames. And then they have to set fire to their tweets because they now realize they just look like idiots.
Yeah. Speaking of tweets here, let me read this one to you, Peter. This is speaking of a lot of tweets on this. This is this was really trending on Twitter. This is from Faith Like Abish here. She said, "I could not care less if Tim Ballard sits on the toilet backwards to pee while singing 'Take Me Home, Country Roads.' He rescues children from sexual enslavement. He is a hero. If I was a child in this situation, I wouldn't care who rescued me, just that someone did." So this is the classic argument: the ends justify the means. Sure, I guess he allegedly did some very, 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 very bad things and potentially criminal things. But as long as the ends justify the means, then everything's fine. So that's not the take that I want to. That's not the horse that I want to hitch my wagon to. You know what I mean?
No, and
Absolutely
it doesn't
not.
work. This is the big excuse the church relies on, and you hear it. I heard it last week. I heard it the week before, talking to live Mormons in the real world. Is you present them with information that proves there are problems, but always it's, I don't care because this is the true church. These people are the men of God. If there's something they're up to that's not good, God will punish them. It's not our responsibility to hold them accountable. And it's that complete lack of accountability and the skepticism, the healthy skepticism and fact checking that goes along with accountability that means craziness keeps happening. And it might kind of be excusable if the church was growing exponentially. and it was a raging success like it was in the 80s and early 90s, or seems to be, we kind of excused this behaviour. We didn't pay too much attention to it because everything was going great. Every state general conference is a big announcement. We've grown by this many 100,000 people. It's going well. Growth is proof of our goodness. They've had to ditch that narrative, of course. But ultimately, the reason you can't tolerate that, even if children were rescued, which seems increasingly unlikely, it's not healthy, because harm was done to people in that process. And if you have untrustworthy, corrupt people running a system, they are eventually going to fall on their faces and break it, and they will break the people they claim to be helping. And that's the larger picture of what's going on in the church as a whole. It's what's going on for these organizations. So the answer is always accountability. If there's a board of oversight for all the operations Tim Ballard did, carefully checking the information before giving the go and operate, and checking what they actually do, that could be a healthy organization. That goes for any organization, any business, any religion, any school, any government. You have to have the scrutiny. You have to have the accountability. And at the moment in our church, it is the podcasters providing the scrutiny, and some journalists, when they're not being God-to-be-ites hacks, apparently. And so it's like, that's where it's coming from. But we're meant to be doing it. One of the Doctrine and Covenants manuals says that every issue that impacts the members of the church should be voted on by the members who will be impacted. It says it in one of the Institute manuals, the law of common consent. We shouldn't just be voting for leaders. We should actually be voting on policy and doctrine and what's going on. There should be this process of listening to the people and accountability, and there simply isn't. They've created a dictatorship of 15 men. When actually all the quorums in the church, down to state level, the Doctrine and Covenants itself says in section 107, they are equal in authority when voting unanimously to the first presidency. And any bishop can convene 12 high priests and put the president of the church on trial. That's in our scriptures, which no one teaches anyone, of course, but it's there. We are meant to be running a system of radical accountability in the church, and that would fix almost everything. But they've worked incredibly hard for a century to remove all trace of that idea, and particularly in the last 10 or 15 years, to disempower everyone to the point where even if they know the leaders are corrupt and being fined by the government and whatever, they will say to your face, "I don't care. It doesn't matter what they do with my money." I had that conversation with mature church members last week, face to face, and it broke my heart, because they're grown adults who have been infantilized and conditioned that far that they no longer have a moral compass. It's gone. And you can't have a church run with people like that and expect it to go to good places. They will just be vulnerable to every kind of exploitation and manipulation, whether from the leaders of the church or someone like Tim Ballard. They've lost their ability to defend themselves from exploitation.
You tell me, Peter, if this next tweet that I found here goes too far, because it says, "Dear brethren, thank you for shining a light on Tim Ballard's betrayal of President Ballard. However, please know, to complete your healing, the Lord may prompt you to recognize a degree of responsibility for the abuse. I urge you to seek help in assessing your responsibility. With love, Richard G. Scott." Is that going too far?
Richard, well, no, not at all. This is it. And again, what people, this is the script the church gives people for all these situations. Okay, all right, you finally convinced me these people are evil, and they harmed children rather than helping them, and exploited extra people in the process. Your job now is not to hold them accountable, not to have church discipline against them, not to ask serious questions to the general authorities facilitating these people and publishing their propaganda. Your job is now just to forgive and move on. Don't hold, and ultimately the bottom line always, do not hold the church accountable. Just don't. It's not an option. Jesus will not let you into heaven unless you forgive us, whatever it was. And then you don't have accountability, and the whole system collapses as it is.
So
I love that meme. That was spot on.
That's obviously that's an insider joke there, and maybe some people might find that in distaste. But during this entire process here, M. Russell Ballard, he's tweeting through this entire process here, just like nothing is going on. He's just tweeting out, like he has his tweets released. I seriously believe that whoever's managing this for the Quorum of the 15, they just have these scheduled tweets that are just scheduled on Twitter that are just to be released. And like the day after this happened, he's tweeting out. He's in the middle of a huge firestorm for the first time in his life. He is trending on Twitter. And what do? You just tweet this out. The Savior is more interested in our personal growth than our mistakes. Repentance helps us become true and faithful sons and daughters of God. We are only eventually made perfect through the Jesus Christ and his perfect atonement. It's just like one of his regularly scheduled tweets that has nothing whatsoever to do.
Like, or maybe it does. It could be intentional, because the message is what I just said. Repent, forgive. God's more interested in healing us than the mistakes we've made. So you could see that as a very clear message from his PR machine. Okay, Ballard made a mistake, just forgive him and repent. So I think, if it was coincidental, then absolutely I believe that. But you could actually, I think, read that into that as well, that he's talking, first line is we make mistakes, don't bother, just
speaking
repent.
Of making mistakes, President Ballard did make some mistakes in this, and he admitted to these mistakes. Let's just go over this real quick. Tim Ballard apparently paid a psychic $122,000 plus a year to talk to a non-historical Book of Mormon character named Nephi to get intel on the trafficked kids. Just like Joseph Smith's treasure digging, her visions never worked. Then an ordained LDS prophet, M. Russell Ballard, promoted Tim's bull crap on BYU, Idaho during a devotional in which President Ballard touted Tim Ballard's ability to learn about Nephi's vision and that he traveled around with him. And this is during a church-endorsed fireside. And he said that he found certain events which have been forgotten by the world represent some remarkable miracles in the prelude to the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So this isn't the case of just Tim Ballard using President Ballard's name in vain. President Ballard referenced him and his psychic adventures with the prophet Nephi in BYU, Idaho devotionals. There's a strong connection here.
So I think that, and it's so ironic that Nephi got mentioned. So what he's saying is he was on this tour, which I think is very expensive, like high ticket number. And it looks like that statement we heard, Tim, where he was being filmed by people on their phones, was that actual tour happening again or something. But there's a guy who tours people around Boston talking about American Revolutionary history, I presume, ungrateful colonials. And he's talking about how prophecies by Nephi in the Book of Mormon were fulfilled by the American Revolution, where you foolishly made the mistake not to become Canada. And so you just couldn't make up the ironies. It's all there. I think
speaking of
the
those
journey
bus
of
tours
becoming
here,
go on.
Yeah, speaking of those bus
tours,
I
was just saying,
those bus tours are available here, and I would just want to play a promo for those bus tours where you, for $5,000, can go on a bus tour with Tim Ballard. Let's hear about that.
Login.
American Covenant Tour. He does this with Bruce Porter, a friend of mine, and that is October 16th to 28th, 2023. So if you want a chance to be with Tim for a week, you have a great chance to talk to him about this, to talk to him about Operation Underground Railroad and what he does and his story and the movie Sound of Freedom. Go take a look.
Hey, for the low price of $5,000, you too can go on a bus tour with disgraced child rescuer Tim Ballard. Seems like a bargain, Peter.
Oh, sign me up. I've got that kind of ready cash.
Hey, that's a lot. It's a little bit more expensive than the $250 a plate dinners with apostles, though. It's getting kind of pricey around here.
Yeah. Can I just re-advertise my empire? So, Canada's done quite well. Yeah, we'll have you back. There are options. You've got choices, Americans. Okay, you don't have to stay in that level of madness. Come back to the fold. We'll take you back. Wayward children.
I appreciate the offer. A couple of other we're gonna be wrapping this up soon here, but a couple of other points that I want to put on the Tim Ballard is, we had the family proclamation here, Peter, and I replaced the family proclamation. I took it out off of the wall that I have, and I put in Tim Ballard, a proclamation to the world instead, because that's a little bit more up to date and maybe not quite as controversial. Does that, I think it's going to be great over my mantle of my fireplace here.
Oh, brilliant. Absolutely. Oh dear. So are you going to
Yeah, but that
I
is
don't know. It's sad, and I think Elder Ballard as well. You know, he's getting on. I think there are rumors that he is slipping into dementia with old age. He
yeah.
came and spoke in Britain during the British Rescue a year or so ago, and he was not holding a good train of thought. He just rambled nonsense for a very long time. So I do think that anything it would have to be his PR people handling this and putting the stuff out online and so on. And this is the problem that by having a church led by slowly dying geriatrics, they're not savvy enough. They're easily manipulated, and their PR people will just say, "Here's this
Yeah.
Tim Ballard guy. He's popular. Hang out with him. It'll make the church look good."
Yeah.
Or I know his great grandfather's stake president. He must be a stand-up guy. It's this amateur, nepotistic, connectedness, affinity fraud that is now absolutely endemic in all the upper echelons of the church. That and where the leaders themselves just don't have time to be in the internet and understand how things come across and what these people really do, and fact check before associating themselves.
Yeah,
You make them
speaking of
incredibly vulnerable.
yeah, look at these associations here. Here we have President Ballard here,
Mm,
who's over 90 years old. On his right is Glenn Beck, who's he's a member of the
mm,
church. He's a kind of a far right wing. He used to have a Fox News program. Now he runs the Blaze here.
mm,
And on his left is Tim Ballard.
yeah.
Here is the upper echelons of church popularity and church power. These are some of the most
Mm,
powerful and popular members of the church who have
mm,
public facing personas, and they're hobnobbing with
mm,
church leadership. And it looks like they're just
yeah.
they're just like a couple of peas in a pod.
Mm. Yeah,
And I
and
do
and
want,
Glenn
yeah,
Beck had a hilarious meltdown in response to this as well. His friend Tim Ballard being maligned by the church, but again, within 24 hours, had to replace it with some waffly thing about having faith and trusting Jesus.
exactly.
Um, it's these people are just naive. They're so used to sounding off quickly before thinking. So I think this is a really healthy course correction. I hope, we always hope, don't we? For the church community and culture. I hope this means that in future people will be all the scandals around these nutty counselors. Another one arrested this week for violently assaulting a client to get the evil spirits out of her and sexually assault her. There's the Jodie Hellebrand thing is just the tip of the iceberg. I hope that these public scandals, as they usually do, will cause some sobering thoughts, that before stake presidents and bishops are rushing people as referrals paid for by the church to get counselling from totally unsafe and unqualified people, that they'll think first now. I hope that the church will be much more careful about the people it endorses and promotes through Deseret Book as thought leaders, you might call these people, if you're going to give them a category, the kind of who push the right buttons for traditional church members raised on this kind of end times rhetoric, and will make good book sales. I hope they start thinking about content over sales,
Yeah, speaking of which, Peter,
and be a
the
bit more
LDS,
cautious.
yeah,
Yeah.
Tim Ballard's stuff was in Deseret Book. It's slowly being taken
Mm,
back out of the bookstore here. The LDS Church
mm,
claims it never endorsed Tim Ballard, and yet its top apostles
mhm.
spoke glowingly about him at BYU Devotional and traveled with him. And Deseret Book promoted his books and had him speak at conferences and podcasts. Sure, maybe that's not an explicit endorsement, but that seems like we're pretty good bedfellows here.
Well, if that's not an endorsement, what does an endorsement look like?
Exactly.
That's an
Exactly.
endorsement. That's it. That's as good as it gets, unless you're an actual apostle. Um,
Exactly right.
and I think, and kudos to Kwaku for pointing that out, saying no, this is real. The church did endorse this guy. It's simply dishonest to say that they didn't. And he also, and he has these funny moments. And he also said, there's criticism of Tim Ballard for consulting psychics to talk to Nephi and find lost children. But every stake has a stake patriarch who basically does psychic readings for every member. So he's pointing out that we need to look at ourselves here. Let's not just get on a stereotypical bandwagon, but actually, have some self-reflection. Why is this happening? Why have we normalized this kind of thinking that empowers people like him to start exploiting other humans, and being hypocritical in what we throw out,
Yeah.
when we need to look at ourselves?
And
Yeah.
that's the crazy thing is
Yeah.
Kwaku took those tweets down as well.
Mm.
Now we're coming up here on General
know.
Conference. You know, we're coming up on General Conference here. And what do you think Elder Ballard is going to talk about in the next General Conference? And as we all know, he's not going to say one word about this incredible scandal that he's been associated with when any other senior leader of an organization would not be tweeting out random pictures of Jesus in the middle of this. He'd be addressing it directly. You know, it's I am going to be listening very carefully to Elder Ballard's talk and trying to read between the lines when it comes to the next General Conference. And I'm not the only one here who, you know, there's been a lot of people out there. There's a couple of other tweets here from This Week in Mormons, who runs a popular podcast that looks at LDS news as well. It says, keep an eye on this developing story this week. What would the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints condemn a member publicly without notifying their stake president or bishop? So we have a process that's supposed to be in place in a church, whereas if a member is credibly accused of misconduct, then they have at least some basic abilities to represent themselves. You don't just all of a sudden run out to the nuclear option all the way at the top of church headquarters without the bishop interviewing him, without a stake president. The Doctrine and Covenant says the church members have the right to call to have you know, members at the disciplinary council, 6 members for you, 6 members against you. You're supposed to have some basic due process here, which was just completely ignored.
Absolutely. You know, my fellow Brit Venture Nemo is trying to get a temple recommend from his bishop and stake president, but they've clearly been leaned on to say from above not to follow due process. Because he's saying, well, this is a disciplinary issue. They're also telling him he cannot exercise his priesthood, and he's been talking about this recently in his podcast. You know, well, but without any disciplinary process whatsoever. So I'm afraid this is par for the course. You know, you have the Strengthening Church Members Committee, Gestapo, spying on everyone, even in their private Facebook groups, and issuing edicts and portfolios to stake presidents to lean on them to discipline people. But it's all behind the official processes, because state leaders are meant to initiate discipline. I'm assuming in my case it was initiated locally. I haven't directly asked my stake president whether he ever got a portfolio from the SCMC. That will be in our next conversation. But certainly, and you know, he was getting angry enough all by himself with what I was saying, and a lot of people being concerned about it to go there. He had to consult with the area presidency. But it's interesting. But then this is another of these weird dysfunctions in the church. If you're a high-profile person doing bad stuff, the church will issue statements about you, but they won't go after your membership, because they did that with, you know, the people who seized federal property over some dispute over ranch lands. They've
Bundy,
done this repeatedly.
Ammon Bundy.
Yeah. Has Ammon ever been church disciplined? Do we know? I don't know. I've not heard about that.
No, certainly not publicly. Not publicly.
Yeah. No. So I think they're trying to avoid making too much of a martyr. They're just moving quickly in the PR space to distance themselves. But if they had integrity, again, as Nemo the Mormon has pointed out at length, the church leaders should be in a disciplinary council right now, because they are senior members. They brought the church into disrepute. They've been convicted or proven to have been conducting illegal financial operations, you know, hiding huge sources of investment wealth that they're meant to have declared to the IRS and to the SEC and refused to, and hid it, as well as hiding it from the members. They have lied repeatedly in public. But there is no church discipline process to hold them accountable. Nemo tried, and he had this amazing, unique experience where President Dallin Oaks actually agreed, after it went up the priesthood line from the area presidency, he agreed to formally investigate 10 lies that Nemo was saying the apostles have told, including himself. And in the end, he didn't defend any of them, except to point to Fair Mormon saying that President Ballard didn't lie. President Oaks didn't lie when he said that there was no, you know, electroshock treatment for homosexual people while he was president of BYU, which we all know Dallin knows, you know. But he couldn't defend himself. So even when you have a system where they claim to follow due process to hold prominent people accountable for bringing the church into disrepute, including apostles, it's completely different rules for them compared to us. If you're a critic of the church, you get hammered by the whole system. If you're an insider, you don't. And if it's considered too politically difficult, you don't. You know, there are various singer celebrities who have very assertively criticised the church, and there's been no church discipline action whatsoever because they're just too famous. So it may be that Tim Ballard has got that kind of level of protection. They realise that if they went after Tim Ballard's church membership, they would then have a massive schism on their hands with all these QAnon Mormons and people who think he's a hero, severely having the kind of faith and trust crisis experience those of us in the more progressive wing have been working through for decades.
Yeah, so I mean, that's the thing.
Hence the speculation that maybe he's had his second anointing.
Yeah, there's a lot of speculation of that, and that's the crazy thing is he's been rebuked by the church very, very publicly, but he says that he's still in good standing with the church.
Yeah.
Underground Railroad out with a new statement tonight after he received a rare public rebuke from his own faith.
It was released about an hour ago. Jamie McGriff's on the live desk with that statement. Jamie.
Okay, so Tim Ballard is pushing back against the statement that was issued late last week by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The church rebuked Ballard for using the name of a high-ranking church leader to further his, quote, morally unacceptable conduct. Tonight, Ballard says that he's a faithful member in good standing. He also questioned whether the church statement was even real, even though the church itself released the statement to 2 News and other media outlets. Tonight, Ballard claimed that evil people are working to oppose his anti-trafficking work, but he said he will keep moving forward. Read his full statement and the latest on this developing story at KUTV.com.
Yeah, so even he is saying that, hey, I'm still a member in good standing. I haven't been excommunicated. My membership hasn't been called into question, even though there are serious allegations of sexual impropriety, financial irregularities, and a number of other questionable personal conduct, that he's in perfectly good standing with the church, even though he was rebuked. Whereas Mr. McConkie, President McConkie that we saw earlier, he has been criminally arrested and he's doomed. So it's just amazing to see how church discipline is enforced.
Yeah, it's all political. It's all contingent. There isn't a consistent ethic going on at all. And this is why people are leaving, because the church presents itself as the ultimate voice for morals, for consistent values, unchanging, but in reality, as soon as you start digging or paying attention to how it actually functions, it functions like a very dysfunctional corporation or political entity, not a religion that prioritizes the vulnerable and truth, and consistency. Even though they love to use those words, they don't actually do it. And until systems are in place to change that, which for me the big answer is accountability, until we are prepared to stand up in conferences 4 times a year and vote opposed to these people continuing to lead and doing it this way, the church is doomed. And it's doomed fast. And I'm not just making this up. As I said, here in Britain, we're down to 11% active and falling. Same across Europe and many other regions, including parts of the USA. There's an accelerating process of trying to buy congregations and stakes just a year or 2 more by merging them. But there comes a point where the distances involved are so large it's not practical, and everyone's just going to have to do Zoom church and stop being Mormon. So this the time is now. And this series of, you've been a busy boy over the last few weeks, my Gideon, this series of epic scandals, evidence-based, not rumor, clear evidence-based corruption financially, covering up and facilitating abusers in every imaginable way, therapists, child abusers, scout leaders, the whole lot, members of royal families in Mormonism, the Tim Ballard stuff, the unwise associations, the whole culture of magical thinking over being real and exploiting people for money on the basis of that. The whole edifice and structure of Mormonism culturally and socially, as well as kind of institutionally and doctrinally, is collapsing around our ears. So this is an opportunity. The church members, because these leaders are clearly not on it or able to do the stuff, the average local church members are going to have to make a big decision very soon. If you want your church to still be here in 10 years for you or your children, you are going to have to stand up and have regime change. I don't mean start a new church. I don't mean use systems outside of our scriptures. I mean vote opposed, as is your right, according to the Doctrine and Covenants, to have accountability, because these people are destroying your church and running it off a cliff, and they are proven liars, and they are proven charity fraudsters. And ultimately, lying and stealing is definitely on the no-no list. And you can't whitewash that. You can't cover it up. You can't tell your children this isn't happening because they will go online and find out. Massive reality check needed. Are you going to do it, or are you just going to walk away, which is reasonable, what most people are doing, or are you going to stay and fight for a bit longer? And that's
Well, that's
what
the thing
my
about the thing
invitation
about that,
is.
Peter, is the fact that a lot of the average members, if you go over here to LDS Living, who does LDS current events, you're saying that that they need to be informed. Well, guess what? When you go to LDS Living, guess what? Tim Ballard stuff is nowhere to be found. If you get your news source from LDS Living, you will not know anything about the Tim Ballard connection. And the same for LDS Daily. If you go over here to LDS Daily, which also supposedly follows LDS News, guess what? The number one news story of the week, Tim Ballard, which literally the Nephi was trending on Twitter. The word Nephi was trending. This was getting national and international attention. If you're a regular member who gets your information from ldsdaily.com or from LDS Living or just going to church, you won't know anything about the Tim Ballard situation. So how are you going to be able to reasonably how are you going to be able to take back your church if you're not even informed about what's happening?
Yeah. And this is the frustration, which is why I've taken to the airwaves to try and inform people. It's an education process. I think though that just the things are so you're absolutely right. If I'm going to church tomorrow, and I'll be amazed if a single human being in my incredibly now tiny ward, used to be 150, now we're lucky to get 30 people there, and falling, if any of them have heard any of this at all. But as soon as they do, as soon as one little email click, one little thread they start to pull on, one of their grandchildren leaving the church over this stuff, and they start to go round that rabbit hole, they quickly find themselves in a wormhole to a whole universe of events and information that was hidden from them. And the sense of betrayal is catastrophic in almost every case. You can't come back from that. So if the church wants to survive, whoever has influence and power to bring it about has got to start being more open and honest about these things. And I worry, as always, as an international member, that they think people have a reasonably balanced information because they're getting the Utah news feeds in their newspapers and TV as part of their secular experience of life. But we get none of that here. And hardly anyone has got time to be following church news online or whatever. You know, you have to be a real enthusiast to find this stuff out if you're in the global church. But increasingly, those of us willing to speak up are starting to have an influence because we have Facebook friends, they have other friends, we'll post stuff. We're giving people the opportunity to be informed. And that's increasing, I think, in a lot of countries. You're getting more and more local podcasters who understand the local scene, who speak the local languages, who have the local social media connections, who are addressing these issues and getting them out of Utah and into the global church conversation. And it is very frustrating when you are bringing up even a tiny percentage of these issues at church and no one's heard of any of it, and you're seen as this terrible liar who's just being negative the whole time. And what you're actually trying to do is inoculate them in tiny amounts to the mountain of bad news that they are going to have to process. And the leaders are completely negligent, not taking responsibility to teach them this stuff first. Like Elder Ballard himself encouraged the CES to when he said, you've got to stop doing faith promoting stories. They need to hear the difficult history from you first at church. And I've pleaded with my bishop and stake president to do this for years. They keep saying, what can we do to help you or people like you? And I tell them, teach the average member of the church about the gospel topics essays, not the kids, the adults who no one ever told any of this stuff, because they're the ones who create the hostile environment in gospel doctrine where you can't even begin to talk about these things because they think you're an apostate evil. And it's on the church website, you know, but they don't know because you didn't tell them.
Right.
It's so the leadership class in every stake have got to make a choice now. If you still want to have a stake in a few years, which my stake no longer does, they just got merged, you have got to seize the reins. You have to take responsibility. And I had a chat with Nemo's stake president, who is adorable, and he said that when his son was about to go on his mission, he sat him down and went through all the gospel topics essays with him because he realized his boy needed to be aware of all this stuff he was going to encounter. And I said to him, why are you not having that same sense of duty of care to all the members of your stake? You know, if you understand when it's your child about to face this, you have a job to do to educate and inform him. Why are you not doing this for all the members of your wards and stakes, even though it's a difficult conversation? And the church has been utterly useless. It hasn't provided any kind of pastoral framework to help your members deal with this information. That's a huge missing manual. How do you actually make this stuff okay? They're given no guidance whatsoever. And this is the impasse we're in. Yeah.
Well, that's one of the best things about the Mormon Civil War. And I wish we kind of ran out of time on the Tim Ballard. There's a lot more that we had queued up, but we're kind of running a little bit late. But what do you have planned up for for the Mormon Civil War? What do you have in the pipeline? What can we expect to see? Because you haven't released any episodes, I think, in about 7 months.
No, it's been a while. We've been so busy with the Brit Venger stuff, sorting out safeguarding and so on. So I'm actually about to unleash a whole load of episodes. I have been busy working on them. So the next is a mini series, which I'm titling. It's kind of an end game for this journey of what to do. So it's taking the Brexit slogan. So it's called Take Back Control: How to Remove Incompetent, Racist, Abusive, Misogynist, Lying Thieves from Power and Give Mormonism a Chance to Survive. I've done a collaboration with Maven on an episode where Brian Hales went on Michelle Black's podcast and just bullied her for her views about Joseph Smith not being a polygamist and so on. That's amazing. I'm going to be responding to Ahmed Corbett's anti-activist talk. He's one to watch. And I'll be doing stuff about the Swedish boys in British rescues. So there's lots more to come.
We're looking forward to it.
And all that's coming soon.
Really appreciate you coming on the Mormon News Roundup, Peter. It's been a pleasure having you on, and I think we've ruminated as much as we can on the great and spacious beehive, and I just want to welcome you back anytime, and always remember our tagline, Peter, is no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing. So long.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.